your source for news, commentary, discussion, and debate at the intersection of the atheist movement and the LGBT rights movement. This is the Atheist Manifesto. Hello, dear friends, and welcome to the Atheist Manifesto. I am your host, Callie Wright, joined once again by the indefatigable doggo Maddie and totally legitimate queer and trans person, Ari Stillman. What's up, Ari?
Thank you for the validation.
I mean, well, those are like two really important things in your life right now, so.
That's true. I learned the most hilarious thing, and I want to get your reaction to this on air, okay?
Yeah.
We're doing it. So AGDQ is happening. It's this speedrunning competition. It stands for Awesome Games Done Quick, and it's like this charity video game speedrunning competition where people watch the stream and donate money.
Right.
And apparently gamers are a little upset about it this year because they've gotten a little stricter on non-discrimination, and they let trans people do it and stuff. And
oh my God.
I found out from Zach that people on 4chan are complaining that trans people can't be good speedrunners because they have to take too many dilation breaks.
Are you fucking serious?
That has to be a joke. Like, that has to be. I really hope that's a joke. I'm like, okay, if you hate trans people so much, why do you even know about that?
I was going to say, is like the hormones and testosterone argument a thing with video games too? Like,
yeah,
like testosterone gives you an unfair advantage in punching buttons?
And people are complaining, oh, we're not allowed to have fun at AGDQ this year because we can't use trans slurs.
Oh,
so apparently this is a problem that's not just happening in the atheist community. It's happening in the gaming community as well.
Oh, I mean, that's kind of everywhere. Let's just be honest. Like,
but apparently a bunch of like speedrunners are coming out as trans left and right. And it's like, wow, a lot of trans people are nerds. Nobody knew that.
Right. Well, I was going to say also a lot of trans people are fast at things. So that's almost like they're a diverse group of people with their own interests and talents. And it's weird. So that just makes the transition into the episode so weird, but we're going to do it anyway. So I knew this lady at a support group I used to go to, and this support group was my lifeline when I was first figuring out who I was and the coming out process and everything. And this one time in a meeting, we ended up being the only two people there. I think it was a holiday or something like that, but I wasn't out at work. So most of the time, I didn't have time to change clothes or shave or clean up or anything before I went. Like most of the time it was just like gross t-shirt, gym shorts, non-shaved. Like this was pre everything as far as transition goes. And so I ended up just me and her at the table at the support group meeting, and we sat and talked for a while. And as we got up to leave, we hugged. And as I pulled away, she looked at my face and goes, "Maybe shave closer next time." And that's like a knife directly into dysphoria center number 1 for me at the time. It made me feel like utter shit. And this is the same lady who later on would offer me a place to stay when I was having problems with my grandma, but laughed when the inclusion of non-binary people was brought up in an event planning session. And I couldn't count how many times I sat through a trans support group meeting hearing things about like how women talk and how women act and how women walk and so on and so on. And I remember hearing those conversations and thinking that like I didn't actually have a lot of desire to fit those stereotypes. And that made me wonder at the time, like, am I really trans? Is this really who I am? I remember hearing stories about trans women wanting to play with dolls and kitchen toys when they were kids. And the fact that I was happy with my Transformers and G.I. Joes as a kid made me doubt myself. I could go on, but the point is, I think we all know there's some pretty exclusionary behavior and attitudes that happen in some circles of the queer and trans community, right? It's something we've talked about on the show before. Recently, one of our guests for this week sent me a message on Facebook asking me about this whole dynamic, and I'm going to let her tell her own story here in a minute. But basically the conversation boiled down to, I'm X kind of queer, but that's not the right kind of queer for some people, so I don't really feel like I belong. And this kind of shit breaks my heart. We talked for a minute and I started thinking, well, this is a thing we might want to do an episode of the show about. And I made a post on Facebook asking people to share their stories of being made to feel not queer enough or not trans enough. And I was fucking overwhelmed by the responses. This shit is everywhere. And I knew it existed, but being confronted with it and hearing so many horrifying stories, like, it made it real in a way for me that might not have been before. Basically, it seems that pretty much anyone who isn't the typical, like, femme stylish gay guy or the stereotypical butch lesbian with a flannel and haircut to match has been made to feel this way at some point or another. And frankly, I bet we can find plenty of examples of those kind of folks being made to feel this way too. Why the fuck do we do this to each other? So we invited some friends on the show to talk about what happens, why we think it happens, and how we might combat these attitudes in our community. So Danielle Muscato, Lexi Whittenberg, welcome to the show, dear friends.
Hi.
Hello.
So Lexi, let's start with you. Your Facebook message to me is what prompted this whole thing. So would you mind just sort of summarizing to me what you said?
Yeah, sure. Well, basically, it all started, like, I'm a fairly new non-believer. I'm fairly new atheist. So I was never exposed to the LGBTQ community before. I was always told, it's the devil. And, I was raised Pentecostal, Southern Pentecostal. So everything is the devil, literally. So recently, I've kind of been exploring and taking some context clues from the past, I guess you could say. And, I've come to the conclusion that I am going to admit that I'm bisexual. And I never knew what the letters meant in LGBTQ until like 3 months ago. I know that's really sad, but bear with me.
Everybody's new at some point. Don't feel bad.
Yeah. And so, I realized the B stands for bisexual. I don't know what else it would stand for, but here we are. And so, I've been more open about it recently. And, Brian, he's very supportive of literally everything that I do. And I can't appreciate him more for everything he does. But so he was kind of the reason why I'm kind of finally getting out there and admitting and, realizing who I am as a person. So about a month ago, I tried to get in touch with our local group leader, I guess, for the Chattanooga LGBTQ community here. And, I kind of told her my story and everything. Well, see, here's the thing, though. She's a straight white female.
Okay, hang on. So,
right.
Okay, I'm just going to okay, go ahead.
Yeah. It's sunk in. So, I was talking to her about it, blah, blah, blah. And she said, well, you're engaged to a man.
And you said, that is correct. Thank you for noticing.
Right. Yeah. And I told her, I said, yeah, well, I mean, if he were a woman, then I would be engaged to a woman. So like it's I don't want to, like, I don't know, but it really made me angry and I was furious and I just stopped talking. Like, I just didn't, say anything. So I talked to somebody else who I know who is who is active in the local community, and she is a lesbian. So, I talked to her about it and I was like, hey, what do I do? And she said, yeah, I'm not going to say her name on, in the open air, but she was like, yeah, she's kind of weird. And I said, well, yeah, that's true as a person, but kind of fun and weird until now. And she said, basically what she feels is bisexual and asexual don't belong. I said, oh.
I'm going to burst a vein in my fucking forehead. Sorry. Go ahead.
I said, oh, okay. Well, so what does that mean for all of us? Everyone who feels like they should be a part of this, who over her definitely reserves the right in the local community. But people just follow what she says and nobody really notices because, well, people like me, I don't really say anything. And I don't say anything about it because I've already been told, you're not bisexual enough. So it's like she wants me, because I was talking to my friend about this, and she either would rather me be in a relationship with a girl, another woman, or in a I hope I'm saying the word right, polygamous.
Yeah, polygamous. Or polyamorous is usually the way it's described, but yeah.
Okay. A relationship like that with him and another woman. And I said, well, that's not even like, that's totally like, no, these are three completely different things. So I don't understand where she's coming from. I don't think she understands where she's coming from, honestly.
I was going to say, and this is like, I need to point out here that this is you saying, I'm new to all of this, and I'm literally just figuring out who I am. But you, on an intuitive level, get this better than the person who is the like self-styled leader of the community where you are?
Yeah.
Like, I feel like I just need to point out that that's what's happening here. Wow.
Yeah, exactly.
How to make people feel safe. Da-na-na.
Welcome to the South, y'all.
My God. Yeah. And that, I mean, that's a story that we hear a lot, especially when people, because the thing is, when people are figuring themselves out and you start to get kind of an intuitive sense of who you are, a lot of times that's pretty shaky, because you're coming to the realization that to one degree or another, you're a thing that you're not, quote unquote, supposed to be, whether that's queer or trans, or I mean, even many other things in life. So a lot of people come into this very, very unsure of themselves, and the kind of validation that comes with being welcomed into a community is huge. And to be met instead with, well, you might be a little bit of this thing, but you're not really this thing enough to like hang out with the cool kids. Like, that's devastating.
Yeah, it was. Well, you always hear growing up, well, are you sure this isn't a phase? Are you sure, you're not going to get over it? It's like, well, you're engaged to a male, you're in a relationship with a man. So maybe it's just like something that you just think about sometimes. And I'm like, no, I would fuck the shit out of a woman. Like, in a relationship with a woman if I wasn't with Brian, to be honest with you. If their personality attracted me and I was attracted, it's just the whole relationship thing, just with a different gender. And it's not just oh, well, she's really cute, or, oh, well, she's really nice, I love her personality, we could be friends. No, it's like when I was in high school, I was in probably a 6-7 month relationship with a woman, and it didn't work out because she ended up being crazy.
Fair.
So, I mean, I know who I am. I didn't want to accept it before, just because, like you said, I've been told my whole life, you're not supposed to be this. But, this is who I am, and this is who I'm happy to be now that, I'm not under pressure of everything else with the religion and stuff like that. But, just coming out of it recently. And so it's been a road. It's been a long road, and it just keeps getting longer.
Yeah, I mean, and I ran into that kind of stuff, not necessarily from other people, but from myself. Like when I would read accounts of trans folks and sort of compare my own feelings and my own story to theirs, like whenever things didn't match up, that was always in the back of my head. What does this mean? I'm not really trans? Does this mean that like I'm just like a kind of feminine guy? Like, is that what this really is? And I mean, those questions themselves are fair questions to ask, right? When you're trying to figure out who you are, because if you turn out to be that, that's okay. But I think the reason that I was asking myself those questions is pretty fucking toxic, right? Because at the core of it, what I was trying to do is figure out if I was real or not. And like, that's just, oh, that's so the wrong question to ask. The real question to ask is, who the fuck am I? And like, and I am not one to say we shouldn't worry about labels, but I think labels come second, right? We figure out who we are, and then we can work on figuring out a label that makes sense, that tells the actual truth of who we are.
Yeah.
God, that's gross. Okay, Danielle, let's hear from you. I've been following your story pretty much since you came out, and I like we first started talking not too long after that, and so like I know this is a thing you have seen a lot of.
I remember on my article when I came out on Hemet Meta's The Friendly Atheist blog, you left a comment on there, and you said, I'm not sure if that was the first time that you publicly said that you were a trans woman or not, but I remember that you mentioning that, and we talked about it later, and you said that was part of the reason that you were able to transition and start to thinking about that. And that's always meant a lot to me. I've always respected you for that.
Well, thank you. I mean, it made me feel safe because watching you come out and then seeing how so many folks in the atheist community reacted to you coming out. So it wasn't coming out because I think I had been out for a while publicly at that point, but I didn't
know you yet at that
right.
point.
Yeah.
But
I was thinking about trying to get into activism and trying to become more active in the community, and you coming out and the reaction that I saw to that made me feel like, oh, okay, this is a thing that I can do. Like it's not necessarily going to be a fight. Like people are interested in having this conversation and talking about this. So yeah, that definitely did make me feel a lot better about doing this whole thing.
I was listening just now to what you were saying, and these feelings. I mean, what you're talking about is internalized transmisogyny, right? Is this? The same ideas that people who are anti-trans have about what trans people are.
Let's unpack that real quick.
Yeah,
because I think that's a really long phrase that a lot of people may not get.
Yeah. So internalized transmisogyny it's transmisogyny in general is just this idea of hating trans women. And so this is really coming from two different groups of people. It comes from conservatives, and it also comes from what are called TERFs. TERF is a trans exclusionary radical feminist. They're generally liberal. They're generally lesbians, although not always, and they hate trans women. They don't believe that trans women actually exist and that we're just men trying to infiltrate women's spaces. And so these two groups of people, conservatives and TERFs, tend to, and there are some liberals who are not, technically radical feminists, but they're also anti-trans. We're getting there. But generally speaking, these two groups of people have a lot of attitudes, and they're very vocal about being anti-trans. And they have, especially conservatives right now, have a lot of political power to reinforce those ideas legally. And this concept of transmisogyny filters through people's consciousness. And when you're a trans person, it can really influence the way that you think. As a trans woman myself, I get a lot of messages from these people telling me that I'm just a man who is pretending to be trans for attention or for Patreon support, that I'm a faggot, or all sorts of other things. And you get dozens and dozens of these messages a week, and they start to influence the way that you think, and you start to believe them if you let yourself.
Especially if you grow up in that culture. I mean, I think that's really where the heart of it is that, from a young age, from childhood, maybe even from birth, you're raised in this culture that sees transness as a bad thing, as a weird thing, as a perversion. And so even if you do grow up to realize that you're trans yourself, you still have that programming inside of you.
And really this idea that it's a perversion, that it's a fetish, is something that people just don't understand. That being trans is just a state. It's not anything sexual. In fact, I am an asexual person. I haven't had sex in years, and I have no desire to. I'd be very happy never have sex the rest of my life. And the reason that I'm trans is absolutely independent of any desire to have sex or any desire to fulfill any kind of sexual fetish. That's absolutely nothing to do with that.
Right. And so what we're talking about is the internalization of those ideas.
Yes,
so
exactly.
You grow up in this culture that at the very least you get subtle messaging whispered in your ear your entire life about what women are, what men are, and what you are specifically in that binary. And so no matter how woke, quote unquote, a person you are, most of us, all of us probably internalize these ideas, and we find it really hard to not apply those terrible ideas to ourselves. So that's sort of the concept that we're describing.
Yeah, exactly. And it is difficult because, especially if you don't fit very neatly into that femme spectrum of, if you're a trans woman, you're very femme, then a lot of people push you into questioning whether you actually are trans or not. And
I'm raising my hand. You can't see it because we're not on video, but I'm raising my hand.
Yeah. So feminine and masculine are there's a spectrum of things, and of the way that people dress, and it includes all sorts of stuff as far as your hair length and the amount of makeup you wear and what kind. and what types of shoes you wear, and pants versus skirts and dresses. And I mean, it's all sorts of things. It's a lot more complicated than just those things. But the long and short of it is that that's a spectrum, masculine and feminine. And, you know, in the middle, you have like tomboys and, you know, presentations like that. But the point that I'm making is this is gender presentation. This is totally different from gender identity. You can have women who dress in suits, and you can have men who wear dresses, and that doesn't change the fact that they're men or women, respectively. It has nothing to do with it. And there's a lot of pressure. And we were talking, you know, at the very beginning, you had mentioned the reasons for why it's like this, and just getting into the history of it just a little bit.
Well, let's hear, before we go there, I want to hear about your individual experience with this.
Okay, sure. So, well, I'll start with this story, I guess. When I first came out, I was nowhere near ready to start presenting femme. I came out kind of, I'll say against my will, really. I got a call from a newspaper reporter who wanted to confirm a rumor that I was trans and do a story about it, and I was like, excuse me, what? You're not supposed to know about that. And I convinced him to give me some time to come out on my own, and then I would give him an interview if he let me do that. I wasn't ready. I had been seeing a therapist for a few months, and I hadn't started hormones yet. I hadn't started dressing femme yet, except a little bit at home. And it was alarming for me and scary, but I talked to Hemet about coming out on his blog, and I did, and that story from that news outlet came out the next day. But I wasn't ready at all, and I didn't actually start even going to a trans woman support group until a couple of years later, when I moved to St. Louis, Missouri. I was living in New Jersey when I came out. But at this trans woman support group, I hadn't started dressing femme yet or anything. I was still, you know, wearing the same clothes that I'd always worn, and looked the way that I look, which is pretty stereotypically masculine. And there were a lot of people there who were very uncomfortable with that, who wanted me to start dressing femme right away, and who were willing to help me do that. But it was never really a good fit for me. I'm not super femme, and there's a lot of pressure on those. Especially on newcomers, to kind of fit into this mold of being femme if you're a trans woman. And I think the same is true for trans men, although I can't speak to that experience.
Well, yeah, and there was a lot too, because let me know if this is okay. I'll cut it out if it's not.
Sure.
But but I know there were some medical issues that were, you know, that delayed your ability to transition. So like there was an issue of readiness, but there was also like a more practical, like medical concerns that was like, you know, even if I was ready to full on 100% do this, like I can't yet. Right?
Yeah. Yes, that's absolutely correct. So I have a heart condition. I don't want to take up too much time talking about it, but basically it's medically unsafe for me to take a full transitioning dose of hormones. I can't do it. If I had a specific, extremely expensive heart surgery, then I might be able to. But in the meantime, I'm on an extremely low dose of hormones, really kind of a token dose just to make me feel better and to shut up my critics about it. But I can't medically transition. It is not something that I'm going to be able to do. And I'm heartbroken about that. And I've struggled a lot with that, about whether I should even just go, quote unquote, back to being a man, because I can't. I will never be able to pass. And that is something that hurts me deeply every time I think about it. I almost don't like talking about it because I just start crying. There's nothing I can do about it, and I'm very unhappy about it. But yeah, that's absolutely correct. It's just the way that it is, and I don't mind talking about it. It's just that it's there's nothing I can do.
Right, and so you're getting it from both sides of the coin, right? Because you have a group of trans women thinking like, this person might be that mythical, like, special snowflake for attention because, well, if you're a trans person, of course you want to transition, and well, this person doesn't seem like they want to, you know, like, and then, you know, on the other hand, you have all of the people who are actually trolling and hating, and yeah, that's got to be a lot of pressure.
Yeah. I mean, I've had self-proclaimed feminists from both trans and cis tell me that, if I want people to respect me, that I need to get rid of all my body hair and facial hair, and that I need to wear wigs, that I need to wear makeup, that I need to wear dresses and heels, as though any of those things make me a woman. And they know better than that, considering that they're themselves feminists, and it's just horrible.
Well, right. And like, even if we accept that premise, which like I need to be clear that we don't, but like even if we do, we're also saying that in order to become a real woman, you also just need a fuck ton of money.
Yep. It's
Like-
very privileged stance to talk about this in terms of respecting someone's gender based on their presentation, because it's extremely expensive to transition. It's not possible for a lot of people for all sorts of reasons, whether it's financial or medical or even just social. I mean, if you're in a situation where you're going to lose your job, you're going to lose your family, you're going to lose custody of your kids, you're going to lose your ability to stay in school or whatever it is, if you come out, people, your friends and people who know should still respect your gender identity regardless of your presentation. They're not linked like that.
Yeah. Ari, do you have any stories?
I have been pretty lucky to mostly avoid this kind of thing personally. Of course, being a non-binary person, again, you see, especially trans women, I think, kind of pushing back against the idea of non-binary people, which, for people who aren't involved in the trans community, it'd be like, what? That doesn't make any sense. Why are like trans women attacking these other types of trans people? But there are some trans women out there who see non-binary people as delegitimizing the trans struggle, as being, kind of special snowflakes who want special rights, and making a big deal out of nothing when, actual binary trans people have real issues. And what are these non-binary people, so-called, complaining about? I haven't had a lot of that directed towards me personally, but I do see that kind of rhetoric online. And there's one story that comes to mind specifically that was directed towards me. This was a long time ago. This was right when I had first realized my identity. So this would have been in my junior year of college. I was actually briefly contributing to a YouTube channel for genderqueer people, and everyone had their own day of the week, and we'd talk about a specific topic each week. And I don't remember what the topic was, but this one week I had made a video, and part of the video was talking about how I don't like to be considered feminine. It makes me really uncomfortable when people use feminine words for me and all this stuff. And, how I see myself as more androgynous. And somebody commented on the video like, wow, you are super feminine. You're even more feminine than most girls. Like, I can't believe you would say that. And I'm like, what the fuck? Like, what are you talking about? I just told you I don't like this. And I clicked on that person. Like, I wanted to know who this was. I clicked on their profile, and it turns out that they were a trans person. I don't know if they were binary or non-binary or whatever, but they had a few videos up. I didn't watch any of them, but I was like, what the fuck? Like, you're coming on another trans person's video and telling them exactly what they said that they don't like to be told as a trans person, what gives them dysphoria, and you're like coming out and talking about that very openly. It made me really upset, and I was just thinking, like, why would somebody do that? Like, why would you purposefully, especially as a trans person, come on to my content and leave a comment like that?
I wanted to mention something about this thing about non-binary and trans, and at the same trans women support group that I mentioned earlier, this might be a relevant story. There used to be a facilitator in that group who is also a board member of the St. Louis Pride overall, and she's no longer with that group, and she's no longer representing Pride in any capacity, actually, because she said something about non-binary people very similar to what you're talking about. She basically said that she doesn't believe that non-binary is a real identity and that it's a stepping stone to coming out as trans. She doesn't recognize non-binary people as trans, and doesn't understand why we have a support group in St. Louis for non-binary people. And I mean, obviously that didn't work well. That didn't go over well, but yeah, I mean, this is an attitude that does exist among trans people. There are a lot of trans people that I'm aware of who do not consider non-binary people to be trans. They think of it the same way that like Christians think of Mormons. They're like, well, you're not Christian, you're Mormon. It's like, but Mormons are like, no, we're Christian too. It's,
That's a
I
good
don't know.
comparison. I hadn't thought of that like that.
It's kind of an interesting thing. I actually stopped going to that trans women support group and started going to the non-binary group. I don't live in St. Louis anymore, but I switched groups like that because the non-binary group, even though I don't identify as non-binary, I am a trans woman. I use she, her pronouns. But that group was a lot less judgmental about my presentation and a lot more open to the idea that people can wear whatever they want and it doesn't change your gender identity. You are what you say that you are, and your pronouns are what they are. And it's fascinating to me that this is such a widespread problem. I had thought that this was much more localized to that one person in St. Louis, and I'm seeing now that this is definitely not the case.
Well, and Ari, you've got a psychology background, so I'm curious if you have any insight into where this sort of stuff comes from. Like on the surface, obviously, it seems really counterintuitive, given that, like, if you're a trans person, you probably know what it's like to be shit on for being trans, but you're gonna still shit on this other person for being the wrong kind of trans, or if you're gay, you probably know what it's like to be shit on for being gay, but you're gonna shit on this guy for not being the right kind of gay. Like I'm sure it's in group out group dynamics, that kind of stuff. Do you have any insight into that?
Yeah, I mean, it really comes down to, I think, a sense of threat. I think people they work very hard. If you're in part of a marginalized group, you work very hard to be recognized as who you are and to have rights and equality as whatever identity it is that you consider yourself. And so when somebody comes along and doesn't quite fit that mold, it can feel a little bit threatening because I think because you're thinking like, well, I have worked so hard, I've sacrificed so much, and this person who isn't a real whatever is waltzing in here and trying to take advantage of all of the work that me and other people have put in. And I've seen that attitude a lot from trans women, especially towards non-binary people. Like, trans women are the ones who are really oppressed, which, is true. I think out of all groups of trans people, trans women definitely have the most violence done against them and that sort of thing. And they have a long way to go in terms of being accepted by broad society. So I do see where they're coming from in that, but I think where they go wrong is that then they don't recognize that this other person is also part of their group. They're not an outside infiltrator. This person may not experience things the same way you do. They may not experience it as severely as you do. Of course, it depends on the specific case, but I think they just fail to realize that this person is like me and this person experiences the same struggles that I do. And instead they see it as kind of a usurper or a pretender or a poser coming in and trying to just kind of, delegitimize the whole struggle.
Yeah, ever since high school and cliques and emo kids and straight edge kids and preppy kids, like I've always been really fascinated with this idea of in groups and out groups. And maybe fascinated is the wrong word because it causes so much harm. Like I don't want to make it sound clinical. Like these things obviously have very, very serious consequences. But, I've always said that I don't think people are going to get past in-group, out-group dynamics. I think the idea is for us to expand what our idea of our in-group is. And
yeah, exactly.
And I always come back to the story of what I mentioned at the top of the show, where I was talking in the support group about how I was having problems with my grandma and things were really rough at home when I was living with my grandma. And without hesitation, I've got a spare bedroom. It's yours as long as you need it. Like, that's an unmitigated act of kindness, right? Because we only kind of know each other. You know what I mean? We're not super close, but she's like, yes, you can literally come live in my house, no strings attached, for as long as you need to. Like, that's an extraordinarily kind thing to offer someone. But this same person in a different conversation where we were talking about, yeah, we should definitely make our spaces more inclusive of non-binary folks, she laughed. Like, she wasn't just argumentative and dismissive. She fucking laughed. And what gets twisted in someone's head where they don't understand that that's the same thing? and I mean, and I guess you just described it. It's the idea that the thing that I am is the real thing, and then anything outside of that is either wrong at the least, or at the most a threat to us legitimate trans folks who are fighting for rights to be real and all of that fucking nonsense.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I think that there's also, I kind of mentioned this earlier, if this is too off topic, just let me know. But I think that there are really relevant historical reasons for why that is. So it used to be, before it was even remotely socially acceptable to be transgender, that you had to pass. If you did not pass, you were going to get killed. And,
right.
Yeah.
And so this was a self-defense measure for trans people to make sure that they passed and to not even come out unless they were absolutely certain that they could. And that kind of attitude of we have to pass in order to protect ourselves, and anyone who doesn't delegitimizes us all, that's still an attitude that really exists, especially among older generations of trans people. This trans women's support group in St. Louis that I mentioned, the average age in there was probably 40 or 45 or something like that. And these people, they grew up with this idea from their parents' generation especially, and also in their own generation, that being trans is absolutely not okay. And, if you wanted to work, if you wanted to be in a relationship, if you wanted to just simply walk down the street without getting your ass kicked, that was necessary. And that's no longer the case, especially in, the Northeast and the Pacific Northwest, whatever. But the point is, these ideas of gender not being a binary is actually a new thing to a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, obviously, I don't think it's actually a new idea, but that's something that a lot of people are still coming to terms with. And I think that there is kind of this same idea of, well, let me put it this way. There is a parallel to the gay rights movement in the 70s and 80s. So when the gay rights movement was really at its peak, I think, there was kind of two groups of gay rights activists. There were the Harvey Milk people who wore suits and ran for office and had the option, like bisexual people, of kind of keeping that hidden if they wanted to. They didn't appear gay. They weren't a visible queer person. And then there were the people, I can say this because I'm gay, but who wore assless chaps and rainbow boas and danced on Pride Parade floats,
Right.
And so
and threw bricks at cops. Good times.
Exactly. And the Harvey Milk type, and this is nothing against Harvey Milk specifically, but the straight-laced gay people, the people who were running for office and so on, were angry at these gay Pride Parade people and saying, you're making us look bad. Like, we're trying to be taken seriously here. We're trying to get some political power, and you're just making us into a joke. No one's going to respect us if they think about us like this, And the gay people who with the feather boas and the assless chaps are like, fuck you. Go fuck yourself. This is who I am. And if people don't like that, I am not the one who needs to change. They need to change. They're the ones with the problem here. And I think that there's a parallel with the trans movement now, trans rights movement, I should say, with non-binary people too, that you have this trans people who are trying to be taken, quote unquote, seriously, who are trying to be quote unquote respected as fitting into this gender binary. And then you have people who are non-binary or who just simply don't, like a trans woman who isn't femme like me, or a trans man who isn't masculine. And are like, no, you know what? I can wear whatever I want. It doesn't change my gender. And if you have a problem with that, you need to change your mind. And, society is the one who has a problem with this. It's not something that I need to change about myself. And I think that we're making progress on that. It took a long time before it was, socially acceptable to be visibly queer as a gay man. But we're starting to get to that point where it's okay to be socially acceptable to be visibly queer as a non-binary person, as a trans woman who doesn't pass, and so on.
Yeah, I definitely see that age gap. Most of the non-binary exclusive attitudes that I've seen have been from older people. The younger generation has definitely really embraced the whole concept of non-binaryism, if that's a thing.
I think we just coined a term here tonight. I'm into it.
No, I think that's absolutely right. I think it's a concept that once people kind of get embedded into their head, it's difficult to break out of that. And I mean, people do it. There are plenty of people who are in their 40s and 50s and older who recognize that non-binary is a thing. But I think it is a generational issue as much as anything else.
And I think
I see a lot of parallels as I'm pansexual, which is technically, I guess, under the bisexual umbrella, depending on how you define those terms. But I'm curious on Lexi's thoughts on this. There are a lot of parallels too here between, gay people and bi people, as you mentioned in your story. You have your gay people who are saying, we've fought for decades to be able to be who we are, and then you have these bi people coming in here trying to take advantage of the work that we've done, but they don't live the life 24/7 like we do. If they're experiencing discrimination, they can just go date someone of a different gender. So again, they feel that threat, like, we're doing it right and you're doing it wrong because we struggle more than you do.
Yeah, I mean, like I said before, I'm new here. This is a new school for me. But I feel like a lot of it has to do with, again, like I said before, a lot of people, especially here in Tennessee, have grown up to be taught that, you go through this phase sometime in your life where you think you might like the same gender, stuff like that. So I feel like a lot of that has to do with that mindset. And
it's an experiment you do when you're in college, and then you settle back into being normal afterwards, kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, to be completely honest with you, this did start out as an experiment in college.
Most of this shit does, right? Like, that's cool.
Here I am now. Well, actually high school, but like everyone else, but mine stuck with me, and I mean, a lot of stuff, obviously, I don't know a lot of stuff about all this, so I really enjoyed listening to you guys talk about it, though. But, I mean, coming from my own personal experience, I think it's, I know I keep bringing up the South, but I mean, we have Baptists, so they have a very strong influence here in Chattanooga. But it really sticks with you because, I mean, I grew up my whole life fearing. I feared every single thing that I did. I was like, oh God, this is going to be, I'm going to have to publicly repent, something crazy like that. And, of course I never did because I never admitted any of it, but whatever. Well, anyway, so yeah, we're all taught and we have a whole, like, Baptist, Methodist, Pentecostal, but it's all the same hardcore, every little thing that you do, you have to be rebaptized pretty much. And so it's always been, well, this is a phase and everyone goes through it because at this time in your life, you're the most vulnerable to the devil, stuff like that. And of course I believed it. I've been with it since I was born, so the preacher knows best, y'all.
Right.
But I think that has a lot to do with it too, just because, again, that's what we're brought up to think. And, our parents, they don't want to believe that their child is gay. They don't want to believe that their child is trans or anything under the umbrella of everything. So, it's really frustrating because nobody believes you. Nobody wants to believe you. And me being only 22, of course they don't believe me.
Oh yeah, you're young. You'll figure it out when you get older.
Yeah, that was something that I experienced a lot. When I was first realizing my sexuality as a teenager, it was the whole, bisexuality is a phase in between being straight and being gay. And it did happen some in my friend group that, like, somebody came out as bi and then it turned out a few months later, oh, they're actually gay. Like, because they were just too afraid to come out as gay, or maybe they didn't even realize it themselves. They wanted to have some sort of a, like, I'm gayish, but it's not that bad. Like, I could also end up with, yeah, like, it's okay, Mom, I could still have kids, if I end up with someone of, another sex or whatever. But So it did kind of have this air when I was growing up as a teenager of like, if somebody comes out as bi, how long are they going to stay bi, you know?
And there's also reasons that people would come out as bi, even if it's not a stepping stone to being gay, and they're also not bi. Like, just to use myself as an example, I came out as bi when I was 16, and I later realized that I was asexual and trans and homoromantic. So for people who don't understand all those terms, I'm just going to quickly run through them. Asexual means I have no desire to have sex with anybody. Homoromantic means that I am attracted to people of the same gender, that is other women, in a romantic sense, but not a sexual sense. And then trans means that I'm a woman, even though I was assigned male at birth. So for me, when I came out as bisexual when I was 16, the reason that I did that is because I knew that I wasn't gay. I was not sexually attracted to men, and I knew that. But I wasn't sexually attracted to women either, and I didn't really know where I fit in. And I knew that something wasn't right, but that was about it. And I had never heard the term asexual except applied to plants, and I didn't understand that being trans was a thing. I had never heard of transgender anything, and I didn't really use that label for a long time. But if you had met me between the ages of 16 and 18, I would have told you I was bisexual, and it wasn't a stepping stone to coming out as gay for me. But some people use it that way, and I think it's, as you were saying, it's important to recognize and believe people when they come out. But it doesn't necessarily mean that's what they are. And it is a phase for some people, but not for other people. But you should never assume that it's a phase or be condescending to someone as though it is.
Yeah, and I think there's this idea that experimentation is a bad thing, right? Because I know a few people who have shared with me that they experimented with non-straight relationships, and they just had some curiosities, they gave it a shot, and they figured out it wasn't for them. And it's like, cool, that's awesome. Like that tells me that you did an honest exploration of yourself, and you now know more about yourself than you did before. That's awesome. And if you experiment a little bit and you figure out, wow, no, actually I am more in the middle of the sexual attraction spectrum, and then later on you figure out like, wow, I'm actually kind of taking a leap together, like that's all okay. I think it comes back to the idea of binaries, and that you have to be this one thing, or if you're not this one thing, you have to be this other thing, right? And this is an experience I had when I first came out as trans. The next question a lot of folks ask me is like, well, so you're still attracted to women, so that means you're all of a sudden gay, right? And like I had spent so much time stewing over my gender identity, the idea of my sexual orientation was like, I don't fucking need that stress right now figuring out that part of myself. But then I thought to myself, I mean, yeah, and it's not that I was all of a sudden that, but I had really been that all along and was just kind of figuring that out about myself. And then I had this really weird experience where I was in the movie theater watching the movie adaptation of The Giver, which I liked and a lot of people didn't. Different story. But Alexander Skarsgård walks on screen, and he is a gorgeous man. And I thought to myself, holy shit, he is hot. And then immediately I was like, whoa, that is a new feeling. And like, wow, okay. So I guess I'm just attracted to cute people. And then I would find myself being attracted to all sorts of variations on androgynous folks. And I was like, huh. I guess I really do just like cute people of all kinds. That's interesting. And again, for me, it wasn't the idea of like, oh, I'm experimenting because it's cool and like special snowflake stuff. It was just like I had all of these barriers removed because my main barrier to figuring shit out about myself was my gender identity. And once I had that barrier removed, I was able to honestly ask myself these other questions about who I was. And those things, I know a lot of folks say that their sexual orientation and their gender identity are 100% separate from one another. And obviously they do describe completely different concepts. But for me, they were interrelated in that way, and that like I had to figure out my gender identity before I could figure out my sexual orientation, if that makes sense. And along the way, back to the topic of the episode, along the way, I had all of these things in the back of my head, but I'm trans, so I can't really be gay, right? Because there was still that idea in my head. I mean, I think everyone still has a lot to unlearn, because that's a lifetime of stuff to unlearn, everything you're taught as a kid. But I mean, I had almost everything to unlearn at that point in my life. And so it's like, well, if I'm attracted to women, that like I can't really be gay, right? Because I'm like basically a dude pretending to be a woman. Like those weren't the words I used in my head, but that's the attitude I still had about myself, because that's what I'd been taught, right? And so I even had that, like, can I even call myself that? Am I allowed to do that? And then I would go online and I would find all of this discourse about how not only are trans women not real women, but like you also can't claim whatever sexual orientation you think you are because of this complication with your gender identity. And like, you can't really be fully this unless you've had surgery, or unless you've had hormones, or at the least unless you're pursuing those things. And I bought into that for a long time because I didn't know any better. I did. You just do a search for transgender on the internet, and it's not all fun stuff that comes up. Ari, I want to get to your next question, because we've got about 10 minutes left, and I think this is a juicy one, and I think this will inspire some discussion that's worth having.
I'm going to call myself out on this question.
I'm going to call myself the fuck out so hard.
Yeah. So we've talked about, trans people discriminating against other trans people, queer people against other queer people, and us as trans and queer people against ourselves. But I was interested in talking about times when we ourselves have fallen into these types of patterns, because I know that nobody is perfect, nobody is immune from this kind of thinking, and we all have this internalized transphobia and queerphobia. So have there been times when you have found yourself judging someone for not being trans enough, for not being queer enough, and did you catch yourself in it? Did you not realize it until later? Are you addressing it? That kind of shit. Yeah, I'll just start calling myself out, being non-binary, and I'm pretty much the archetype of a non-binary person. Like, when people think of the stereotype of a non-binary person, they think of someone like me, like somebody who was assigned female at birth and is androgynous and has a short haircut and likes to wear t-shirts and jeans and doesn't wear makeup. Of course, there are tons and tons of different types of non-binary people, but that's, I think, the type that gets the most exposure. And when people think of non-binary, oftentimes they think of that. And so there have been times, I think because I'm in this quote unquote privileged position as a non-binary person, of being taken mostly pretty seriously on that. When I've come across other people who don't fit that expectation, I have been like, what's going on here? Like, I know some people who identify as non-binary, but they present exactly like the gender that they were assigned at birth. They might even use the pronouns they were assigned at birth. They dress in a way typical of the person of the gender they were assigned at birth. And in my head, I'm thinking, like, how are you non-binary? I don't understand. Like, are you just doing it because you think it's cool? And I have to take a step back and talk to myself and say, like, it's not my job to tell that person what labels they can use. And even if they present a certain way, again, there's a huge difference between presentation / expression and identity. So, I can't get in their head and judge what their true gender is. It's really up to them to do that. And I think it's the safest thing to do is to, again, take somebody at their word and believe them when they tell you that they're something.
Yeah, I've got a couple examples of this for myself to call myself out. So in this support group, I don't know. I feel really bad about this attitude, and this is not an attitude I hold anymore. This is something that I have unlearned and worked myself out of. But while we're being honest about the things that we have done that we may not necessarily be proud of in this arena, there was a trans woman who came to our support group who was the archetype of like redneck guy by appearances, like super thick hair all over the place, and long beard, and wearing a dress. And at this point in my life, I'm like, hey, you're probably wearing that because that's comfortable. That's fucking cool. It looks good on you. Awesome. Do your thing. What are your pronouns? Cool. Like, it doesn't faze me anymore because that's not what's real about a person. But I definitely had this attitude like, what are you doing? Like, what's this all about? You know? And again, this was at the time that I was figuring myself out. And I think I was doing that thing where I was like, okay, well, I know what my goals are. And of course, what my goals are in my head is what's real. And this person doesn't fit that. So in order for me to affirm myself, I have to take away from this other person who's doing it differently. And that was a really difficult thing for me to unlearn, to be honest. And then I'll give a more recent example of this. So I think it was episode 135, the Callie's New Gender Feels episode, when Ari and I had this discussion about how I was sort of questioning my binariness about...
And I schooled you.
I got fucking schooled.
It was rough. She left crying.
Yeah.
She probably edited that part out. But yeah.
But we had discussed in the show that I was kind of worried that I was sort of being appropriative, that simply because I was figuring out that more and more feminine stereotypes didn't fit me, that I thought that was making me maybe non-binary. And I realized, like, I really haven't given an update on the show on what I figured out about that, because we definitely left the episode with me like, I got a lot to think about here. And I have come down on the side of, honestly, that's where my head was at. And, I like to think that I'm pretty well versed and pretty non-binary in my thinking, if I can use that phrase. But when it gets right down to it, I think I was just figuring out that I'm not a femme woman. You know what I mean? Like I figured out that I really like flannel, and I like side shave haircuts, and I'm cool wearing men's shoes, but like that's not the stuff that necessarily makes someone non-binary, and that's not...
Yes, it is. That is what makes you non-binary.
And then I eventually had to, just come down on the side of like, I was thinking that for what honestly turned out to be problematic reasons. And I am who I've pretty well known myself to be. It's just sort of the outside has changed a little bit. The way that I present myself is different because, thankfully, 4 years into my transition now, I feel a little bit less pressure to conform to those stereotypes. And that's honestly, I mean, that's a measure of privilege, right? Because even, dressed in jeans and a flannel and like no makeup and not doing really anything but brushing my hair, generally speaking, I'm read as a woman. Like people generally read me as I am. So it's easier for me to blend in. So so there's less pressure on me. And so I kind of had a thinking session with myself about figuring those feelings out and figuring out that's really where that was coming from. Lexi, Danielle, what do you got?
Guess,
call yourselves
spill
out.
Your guts.
Let's do it.
Confess your sins.
I still honestly have a hard time with a lot of it just because it's so new to me. And I don't really vocalize anything that I'm thinking out loud, thankfully. But I didn't know what that non-binary existed until about August of last year. And I was 21, went 21 years of my life without knowing what that was.
Hey, me too. I figured out that I was non-binary when I was like 21, so you're right on track.
Well, and it was when I met Trav. And that's when I found out that this was a thing.
Love you, Trav.
Yeah. Well, of course, I never said it to their face, but it took me so long to get the pronouns right. So long. And because I read them as a male. And Brian always got on to me. He was like, dude, really? Come on, get your shit together. And I'm like, I'm sorry. I didn't know. I went my whole life not knowing that that this existed, that people, I don't want to use the wrong word, but like we're this way, I guess. I feel like I'm sticking my foot in my mouth, but
no, you're fine.
No,
Listen,
that's perfectly fine.
I feel like I give off this air that I'm like super advanced or whatever on this stuff, but I mean, honestly, with not, I mean, I didn't think non-binary stuff was silly when I first learned about it. It was just like, oh wow, that's new. I had no idea that was a thing. And that's, you know, aside from the fact that I really like Ari as a person, that was also part of the reason that I asked them to join the show, because I think that's an important point of view. And so, I mean, that concept is really only 2 or 3 years old to me. So like it's new to a lot of people. And I think the important thing is like being willing to learn and understand and say, well, this is who I am and these are my pronouns. And the only right answer to that is, okay.
Well, see, you know, I've always been such an open person for everybody. You know, I'm empathetic, I'm sympathetic by nature, and you know, I get along with everybody, all kinds of personalities. You know, whoever you are, I'm gonna love you no matter what. But it just the different concepts and the different mindsets and just everything it's just so new because I'm so used to that uniform mindset. Everybody thinks the same, you know, everybody has the same, you know, concept of life and nature and people, and you know, and it just melted away as soon as I met Brian. It feels like, because you know, he opened my eyes and he showed me this whole world that I was completely shut, like that my raising completely shut out. So, you know, of course, before then, of course, I was super judgmental and I was such a bitch, and I felt so bad about it afterwards. Like after, you know, seeing all this and meeting all these people and seeing how wonderful this is, and, you know, just all this stuff. And I'm just like, God, I'm a dick. So 21 years, that's the first 21 years of my life. That was me.
Danielle, what do you got, friend?
I don't even know what to say. Well, I've been trying to think of an instance where I was hypocritical on that point, and I'm having some trouble coming up with one. I'm sure I'll think of one later, but
I'm Danielle Muscato. I'm perfect.
no, hey. No, my best friend came out as gay when I was in 6th grade, and I think I've always kind of had a non-judgmental attitude about all of these kinds of things. And I didn't grow up super religious, but I became quite religious when I was 21. And even then, even when I was at my most religious, that was kind of the major point of disagreement between me and the church that I worked for at the time, was that I was non-judgmental about all of this stuff and they weren't. And that's also a big part of the reason that led me to becoming an atheist and eventually leaving religion, was that I'm not judgmental about this stuff. And I think a big part of the reason that it's been difficult for me to think negative things about people who don't conform to this, the binary of gender, or to being straight as expected by, you know, a quote unquote Christian culture or whatever, is that I'm personally not fitting in with that either. I know that I'm trans and that I don't pass, and you know, it's really hard for me to look at somebody else who's trans and doesn't pass and say that they're doing something wrong, just because I know that I feel the same way about myself, and I know how much it hurts when people say that. And I'm not trying to, you know, to say that I'm perfect on this point. I'm sure that I've said things that people have taken as cruel. But I'm having trouble thinking of a specific instance where I thought something like that about somebody or said something like that about somebody.
Well, no, and that's okay, because really what I think the point of the question is to just sort of self-reflect and just further unpack the idea, because you know, if we're thinking, you know, if we're thinking in the near past, I mean, it's been quite some time since I've sort of let go of that whole, like, everything has to be the way that I do things. And that's not to say that I've unlearned every bad idea about gender, because I still have them. You know what I mean? I think it's pretty much impossible to let go of them completely. But I think, I don't know. I've noticed this thing that Ari likes to do, and I love this because I think it's always really important to examine ourselves and to understand that, like, you know, while we're standing up talking about inclusion, no matter how good we think we're doing, it's really, really important for us to step back and reflect and make sure that we are, and to recognize any time in our past where we may not have been, so we can figure out where the flaws in our thinking were. And,
Sure.
and I think that's really what it comes down to is just doing a sort of honest examination of that. Ari, am I explaining your?
Some might call that ideological purity, but yeah, pretty much. I think really. You did understand that the point of the question was just for us to realize that we are not, 100% woke people, that everyone, it's like atheists who think that they're skeptical about everything and that everything that they think is automatically true because they're a logical thinker and they don't follow religion, they only follow reason. It's the same type of thing. You have to realize that even if you may be in a better off position than some other people are when it comes to queer issues or gender issues or, views on religion or whatever, you're still a human. You're still not perfect. I study psychology. Our brains are pretty terrible at thinking rationally for the most part. And we can always strive to be doing better at that and to be doing better on issues of empathy. But we do have to recognize that there will be times when we fail, and all we can do is, be honest about those times, accept them, and try our best to rectify those in the future. I hear it.
Well, friends, that is all the time that we've got. Lexi, before we go, do you have anything you want to plug? Are you still doing the Scenic City Skeptic podcast? Is that still a thing?
Well, we actually just started it back up after like 3 months.
Nice.
So,
tell us where we can find it.
Okay, you can go to our website, scspod.com. We're on Twitter at scspod, Facebook, Scenic City Skeptic, Spreaker, iTunes, Google Play, blah, 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 blah.
All the podcast places.
All the things.
Danielle, what do you got?
I am on Twitter at Danielle Muscato. I'm also on Facebook at Danielle Muscato .page. I run a podcast called the Resist Podcast that you can find at resistpodcast.com, on Twitter at Resist Podcast, or you can just look for it on iTunes and so on. And I also have a Patreon at patreon.com/Danielle Muscato. And I'm really glad that you had me on the show. I really appreciate the invitation. I always loved coming on your show, and thank you very much for the opportunity.
Absolutely. Thank you both for coming on. It is greatly appreciated. So to close out the episode, I really had planned to do this sort of epic takedown and just sort of like tear apart people who gleefully do this kind of stuff. But like, I'm not really feeling that because genuinely, that's not the kind of person that I try to be. So here's my epic takedown. If you do this kind of shit, fucking quit it. You're doing bad things and you should feel bad. What I really want to say is I want to speak to you who have been made to feel this way. So our queer friends in relationships that have been deemed too straight to count, our asexual friends, our gender non-conforming friends, our non-binary friends who don't check off enough of the stereotypes to be considered real in some people's eyes. Who you are is fine. You're valid. You deserve to be a part of this community as much as anyone else does. You're not wrong. The people who exclude you are wrong. You're more than your clothes, more than your shoes, your haircut, your gay pop culture expertise. You're more than the cleverness of your hot takes. It's fucking heartbreaking to me that you feel compelled to be something different than you actually are just to belong. Who you are is okay. And that, my friends, is going to do it for this episode of the Gay Theist Manifesto. We are a proud member of the Trans Podcaster Visibility Initiative. We're a group of trans podcasting badasses working to bring more trans voices into podcasting and other content creation. Search for the Trans Podcaster Visibility Initiative on Facebook for more info. You can find the show on Facebook at facebook.com/The Gay Theist Manifesto. You can email us at podcast@thegaytheistmanifesto.com. I'm on Twitter at GayTheistCallie. You can find the show on Twitter at The Gaytheist. And I bet Ari's got a thing.
Callie, guess what?
What?
I got a doggy.
Oh my God. And it's such a cute pupper. Like, I am so jealous.
She's the best pupper.
I'm like,
and I'm going to tell you all about her so everyone gets to sit here and listen to me go on about how much I love my dog. Okay, I'm going to tell you all about her. Her name is Penelope, a.k.a. Pee-Pee, a.k.a. Pee-Pee Head, a.k.a. the Pee-Pee-headed dog. That I don't know why she deserves those names. That's just how she's called. She is a Boston Terrier mix. Don't ask what she's mixed with. Nobody knows. Who cares? Oh, crap, look right behind you. There's a thing happening. She is physically 2 years old, but emotionally 37. She is a cis girl. Her religion, I know you're interested in this because we already have a neocon living in our house here, name of Tina the cat.
right.
She is not that. She is a wishy-washy Buddhist. She likes The Secret. So, we need to work on that a little bit. As far as politics goes, she is really just kind of a hippy-dippy liberal. She doesn't pay much attention to most politics. She just wants to know why people can't get along. Her sexuality, she's mostly straight, but sometimes bi-curious, especially when she gets tipsy. Her celebrity crush is The Rock. Her favorite music is transcendental meditation and relaxation, but sometimes she secretly binges on Sia and Ariana Grande. One thing that she says a lot is, girl, you wouldn't believe the day I had. I'm so stressed. I'm just going to pour myself a glass of wine and watch my stories. And a few fun facts to close it out. She thinks jumping on the couch is exercise. She has PTSD just like her Maddie, and she has never seen any movies.
Wow.
So if you want to see pictures of her and hear me gushing about her more on other podcasts, you can friend me on Facebook, Ari Stillman. Email me, aristillman4@gmail.com. I'm on the show called This Is Getting Out of Hand, and also the SJW Circle Jerk, which you shouldn't listen to except if you're just going to skip to the parts where I gush about my dog.
If you want to support the show and the activism we do, you can head to patreon.com/The Gatheist Manifesto and make a per episode donation as little as $1 per episode. And if you can't do that, you can still head over to iTunes, give us a 5-star review. That helps us get heard by more people because we move up in the rankings. Before we go, I want you to know that if you're lost, you're hurting, you're scared, if you feel like no one cares and no one understands, you need to know there's a community out here that loves you, cares for you, knows that you're capable of amazing things, and that you are worthy of love. If you're struggling, please don't be afraid to reach out. Until next time, friends, this is The Gatheist Manifesto.
It's Pitbull. She's mixed with Pitbull. It's a secret. Don't tell anybody.